Suspect neutralized.
Hello friends, ich heiße Sven und ich komme aus Deutschland, and welcome back to Battlefield Hardline. Now, I think it should be no surprise to any of you that play the Battlefield Hardline beta that if somebody asked me to describe the game mode of Hotwire in 5 seconds, I would probably show them something like
Explosions from Michael Bay!
Now, I've been curious about this topic for a while because I think it's a complicated issue that is not necessarily black and white, and that is whether or not explosives in Hardline are overpowered. You know, I think there are so many different schools of thought as to exactly how the explosives should fit into the core gameplay mechanics of Hardline. It's one of those few issues that is not necessarily us versus them. And what I mean by that is, for example, bullet damage. It's pretty well black and white in my opinion, in that there are a tremendous amount of people that want the bullet damage to stay as it is now, and then there's a large opposition that want the bullet damage to be lower. Now, I think that explosives are much more of a speaking issue because it's not just two sides arguing against each other like the bullet damage topic in the game, because when it comes to explosives, people have all kinds of proposed solutions and tweaks that all seem viable, but as always in Battlefield, it's difficult to get everyone to agree. And allow me to preface what I'm about to say by clearly stating that I'm going to focus on the M320, the RPG, and the Small. The RPG and the Small are they're not quite the same statistically, but I'm going to speak about them in the same way. Now, I personally think that the breaching charge, formerly known as C4 of course, is balanced. I don't really feel the need to talk about it because I don't think it needs to be changed, but that conveniently leads me to my next point. And that is, I do invite your opinion about explosives. I mean, I know I always welcome your feedback when it comes to whatever I'm talking about in a video, but I think with this specific topic, I desire your opinions. And although it is common knowledge that my comment section is basically the Wild Wild West, where you can make a cogent argument against what I'm saying and spell everything correctly, and you'll still have several replies from 14-year-olds with doggy profile pictures that say, "Wow, shut up, nerd," or "Darude Sandstorm," or "Notice me, senpai," or "Badger, you're a big," anything like that. You're still gonna have to suffer through that. But if you're willing to weather the comment section storm, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Whether you're the hardcore player that immediately starts posting on social media anytime that you dislike a feature in a game, or just some guy that played Hardline for 30 minutes after you got home from work before you had dinner, I certainly invite all of your replies. Now, I would like to start off by saying that I believe that Hardline is going to change tremendously more in terms of balance within the first 3 months of release than it did during the beta. And the reason that I say that is obviously during the beta we didn't have access to all of the weapons, all of the maps, and all of the game modes. And I think for most balance determinations, you're going to need all 3 to form any sort of declaration that certain weaponry or certain features are overpowered. The RPG is a bit of an exception, of course, but I know there's a lot of you that keep messaging me about stopping the feedback talk, and I think that we still need to provide the developers with as much logical feedback as we possibly can throughout the release of the game. So it's certainly not as if the tweaks and amendments to the game ended when the beta did. I still think that there's plenty of progress to be made. Now, with that being said, I think that most of my discussion is going to center around Hotwire, the M320, and the RPG/Small. I know they're not quite statistically identical, they're pretty similar, but I'm going to speak about them in the same light. And the reason that I'm focusing on these items is that they were so popular during the beta, and I think it'll be no different once the game releases on March 17th. I mean, I definitely believe that Hotwire, Blood Money, and Conquest will be the most played game modes by far. They're going to absolutely dominate Rescue and Heist and all the other ones, at least that's what I'm forecasting. And of course, with Hotwire comes all sorts of explosive spam, and thus the M320, RPG, and Small. Now, I know that these large explosive launchers are a source of frustration for so many of you just because you don't believe that they fit in a police-themed game, and you know what, I see your perspective there. You know, I fully understand that you will probably never hear 3 armed robbery suspects were killed this afternoon after fleeing a downtown Los Angeles bank after their vehicle was struck by several RPGs fired by parachuting LAPD police officers. You know, I fully understand that. But with that being said, I think that having these launchers in the game is completely acceptable. And I know that's going to make a large percentage of you butthurt, at least those of you that always make the realistic argument every time, and I think that's totally misguided. Just allow me to say it loud and clear so that I'm not misunderstood and there's no ambiguity about what I'm saying. Battlefield Hardline is not a simulator. Allow me to say that one more time. Battlefield Hardline is not a simulator. Battlefield really hasn't been anything close to a simulator for several years. I think that Battlefield 2 was a little bit closer to a simulator feel, but I still think at the end of the day, Battlefield has evolved into a large-scale arcade shooter. I know that many of you are so resistant to that word arcade just because it's commonly used with Call of Duty or Counter-Strike, but that's really all that Battlefield is now at its core. I mean, you've got a plethora of different vehicles and maps that are much larger than most other shooter games on the market, but that's all it is. It is an arcade shooter with large maps and vehicle play. So for those of you that immediately dismiss Hardline having RPGs just because it's unrealistic, please go play Arma. Seriously, go play Arma, because in so many different ways, Battlefield Hardline is not designed to be realistic. If it were designed to be realistic, players will be put down by a single shot from an AK-47. Random cops and criminals wouldn't be running around with a seemingly unlimited amount of parachutes on their backs, and cops wouldn't be planting car bombs underneath the vehicles of suspected criminals. So when I constantly hear that certain features shouldn't be in Hardline just because they're unrealistic, I just sit there and laugh, because not only is Hardline a video game, but it's also not a simulator video game. So I overall think the whole realism argument is pretty silly when it's posed as justification for ridding Hardline of all explosive launchers. And I think the final word that I would have when it comes to realism in Hardline and RPGs or explosive launchers is this. The game is meant to be based in authenticity. Now, it's not perfectly authentic because it is in fact a video game, but it's designed to be based in a theme of authenticity, not necessarily realism. So I think if Hardline was tied down by having to strictly adhere to perfectly realistic features, it wouldn't be fun to play, and it would be an exceedingly frustrating experience. But it doesn't need to be perfectly realistic to be fun or authentic as a first-person shooter, and that's all that I had to say about the whole realism issue when it comes to RPGs and explosive launchers in a cops and criminals game. Now, as for the RPG itself, I've got some mixed feelings, and I'll be speaking mainly about how it pertains to Hotwire because, like I said, I think it'll be a core game mode in Hardline upon release. And to put it to you simply, I do think that the RPG isn't balanced in Hotwire. I'm not necessarily tearing my hair out and screaming OP, but I think there are several different avenues that can be taken to remedy the situation of this little imbalance. And I think when it comes down to it, the main reason for this imbalance is that it basically one-shots everything. I mean, you know, whether it's a sedan or a coupe or the tank or even infantry on the ground, it's like carrying around guaranteed kills on your right shoulder. And I think I first had the impression that the RPG could potentially be OP when I first started using it more frequently and started to feel nearly invincible. I mean, just the general feeling that I had when I picked it up. Like, I knew deep down in my heart that any engagement that I found myself in, I have supreme confidence that I will kill whoever I'm up against, whether it's an oncoming car or another infantry layer on the ground. I always had this feeling that I would never lose the engagement, and I think that's where I first started to believe that it may be a little bit imbalanced, mainly because there are very few weapons that gave me that same tactical confidence in all of Hardline. So just to repeat it one more time so that I'm clear to you, I do think that the RPG is currently imbalanced in Hardline. And as for solutions, I have two ideas that I think could both serve to fix the situation. Number one would be nerfing the RPG itself, and I think this is a fairly simple fix, and here's how I would do it. Against infantry, I would simply lower the one-hit kill blast radius. I think that would be a pretty simple tweak, and I would also make it so that it doesn't quite one-shot nearly all of the vehicles in the game, but instead, it disables them by bringing them down to, say, 10 or 15 health. And that way, you would need to direct impact an enemy vehicle with an RPG, and then dump an entire mag with your primary weapon in order to blow it up, instead of just one-shotting anything on four wheels. And yet again, I know that many of you will be opposed to this because it doesn't really make sense from a realism standpoint that an RPG wouldn't one-shot a car. Like, obviously, an RPG can rip through many modern tanks, so it not ripping through and instantly destroying a car may be difficult for you realism advocates to tolerate, but like I said before, it's not a simulator. It is not a simulator. I'm concerned with balance here, not realism. So that's my first idea. Now, my second idea would be to not nerf the RPG at all, but make it less ubiquitous. I think it's no surprise to anybody that played Hotwire during the beta that the RPG was extremely prevalent because you could grab it out of a trunk, or even most of the time it was close by in a trailer as a battle pickup. But whatever the case may be, the RPGs were easily accessible in Hotwire, and I think if you were traveling around in a marked car, you expected to be one-shot by it if you drove around a certain route on the map. Now, in terms of making it less ubiquitous, I think there's several avenues of approach. You could simply make the battle pickups scattered around the map more LMGs and less RPGs in order to remedy the situation, or you could even make the battle pickups random altogether so that a player can't consistently go to the same spot to grab the RPG over and over and over again. Another approach would be to put a cooldown timer on grabbing the RPG out of a trunk, whether that would be 3 minutes or maybe 5 minutes. I think we need to test it out, but I think that it would greatly aid in making the RPGs less common and less of a problem, and those are basically my 2 recommendations for a potential balancing of the RPG. Now I know, now that I said the RPG needs tweaks, that perhaps means that the M320 also needs to be subsequently amended, but I think that for right now, it's fine where it is. I mean, perhaps lowering the damage from where it is now down to about 34 damage for a direct impact may be an appropriate change for Hardline, but I still think that the RPG needs to be changed first, because, you know, I still think that the idea of changing the M320 into a gadget that can 3-shot a vehicle instead of 2-shotting it like it does now is another change to consider, but it simply is not as annoying as the RPG. And I know I'm just like you guys in that I've experienced all kinds of situations with 4 dudes riding in a fully decked out sedan and then they simply destroy anything that they encounter with 320s, but at the same time, keep in mind that although they are tremendously powerful, they are also still a quadra kill waiting to happen for a guy with an RPG around the next corner. And that's another question that I pose to you guys. If they end up nerfing the RPG, does that mean that the M320 should be nerfed as well? Because in a certain way, I think you can view the M320 as half of an RPG in that I can 2-shot most vehicles. But please, let me know, should the RPG and the 320 be changed? That's like the focus of this entire video. Yes, maybe, absolutely not. Please let me know. But whatever the case may be for balance, I must say that there is nothing more satisfying in a fully loaded sedan than hearing the triple thump. And for those of you that have not heard it yet, it's amazing. Just listen closely.
Taking out the suspects!
Be advised, we're close to wrapping this up.